I spent 12 grueling months deployed in an active combat zone, serving my country with everything I had. Every single day, what kept me putting one foot in front of the other was the thought of coming home to my husband, Ethan, and the quiet life we had built. But deployment changes how you see the world, and nothing can prepare you for the devastation of finding out that the person who promised to wait for you was actually plotting your ruin. When my plane finally touched down, Ethan wasn't at the hangar with a sign or a smile. He had texted me a cold, brief message saying he was tied up at work and that he would see me at the house. I took a military shuttle back to our suburban home, my heart racing with anticipation. But when I walked through the front door, dragging my heavy sea bags behind me, there was no welcome home embrace. Instead, Ethan was sitting on the couch, surrounded by legal folders, with a look of absolute indifference on his face. Before I could even drop my bags, Ethan stood up and handed me a thick stack of papers. He coldly informed me that our marriage was over and that he was throwing me out of the house effective immediately. I stood there, utterly shell-shocked, still wearing my combat boots and uniform, listening to the man I loved destroy our entire life together. Ethan sneered, claiming that the house was solely in his name, that he had already transferred our joint savings into a private account, and that my long absence had legally constituted a breakdown of the marriage. He told me that his career was skyrocketing, that he had met someone else who actually fit into his executive social circle, and that a rigid, damaged soldier didn't belong in his life anymore. "Your bags are already packed in the garage," Ethan said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "You need to leave before I call the authorities for trespassing. You're yesterday's news, and you have nothing left here." He physically pushed past me, tossed my remaining military gear onto the driveway, and slammed the door, locking me out in the cold. I sat on my sea bags on the curb, the sting of the betrayal cutting deeper than any wound I had ever received overseas. Ethan thought he had calculated every move perfectly. He thought that because I had been deployed, I was disconnected, broke, and helpless against his corporate lawyers. But Ethan had made a critical, irreversible error. In his arrogance and haste to strip me of everything, he had completely forgotten about the sealed legal letter my father had given us as a wedding present 3 years ago, a letter that was locked inside a secure safe in the garage, the one place Ethan hadn't cleared out. My father had passed away 6 months into my deployment, a loss that had broken my heart while I was thousands of miles away. Before his passing, he was a high-ranking, extraordinarily wealthy real estate tycoon who owned half the commercial developments in the city. When Ethan and I got married, my father had quietly purchased our suburban home through one of his massive corporate holding companies, allowing us to live there under a private family arrangement. Ethan truly believed that because his name was on the localized residential utility bills and basic occupant agreements, he was the master of the estate. I dragged my bags into the garage, entered the biometric code into my father's old security lockbox, and pulled out the sealed, heavy parchment letter marked with my father's corporate seal. I opened it and read the words my father had written before his death. It wasn't just a letter of love, it was a masterfully designed legal trap. My father had never fully trusted Ethan's slick, opportunistic nature. The letter explicitly detailed that the house, the land it sat on, and the very corporate firm Ethan worked for, which was a subsidiary of my father's conglomerate, were strictly tied to my marital status. The document contained a fully executed, pre-filed corporate clause stating that if Ethan ever legally defaulted on our marriage or attempted to alienate me from the property, ownership of the house would instantly revert solely to me, and his employment contract would be immediately voided for ethical violation of corporate family bylaws. A cold, unyielding military calm took over my veins. I didn't shed a single tear. I didn't beg Ethan to change his mind. I simply took the document, snapped a photo of it, and sent it directly to my father's estate attorneys and the executive board of Ethan's company. The hammer dropped 48 hours later on a rainy Thursday morning. Ethan was hosting an elite brunch at the house for his new mistress and several major corporate executives he was trying to impress. He was laughing, pouring expensive champagne, and bragging about how he had finally freed himself from his burden of a wife. Suddenly, the front gates rattled open, and a fleet of black corporate vehicles pulled up the driveway. Before Ethan could even react, my father's chief legal counsel walked through the front door, flanked by 2 county sheriffs and the senior vice president of Ethan's corporate firm. Ethan rushed forward, demanding to know what was happening. The attorney didn't even look at him. Instead, he handed Ethan a certified copy of my father's letter, alongside an immediate federal eviction notice and an official termination of employment. The senior vice president stepped forward, looking at Ethan with absolute disgust. He informed Ethan that because the property was entirely owned by the parent conglomerate, his unauthorized occupation and attempts to illegally evict an active duty officer constituted gross corporate fraud and a direct violation of federal military protection acts. "You're fired, Ethan," the vice president said coldly. "And your professional reputation in this city is entirely finished. The board has already initiated a forensic audit on your department accounts." The color completely drained from Ethan's face. The champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the hardwood floor. His mistress instantly began packing her things in a panic, realizing that the wealthy executive she had aligned herself with was actually completely penniless and facing total ruin. Within 20 minutes, the sheriffs ordered Ethan to pack whatever he could fit into 2 standard boxes and escorted him off the premises. I pulled up to the driveway in a black SUV just as Ethan was being marched down the steps by the deputies. He looked broken, pale, and utterly defeated. He ran toward my window, tears streaming down his face, begging for forgiveness, claiming he had just made a terrible mistake under stress. I rolled down the window just an inch, looked him dead in the eye with the cold precision of a soldier, and handed him a pen. "Sign the unconditional divorce waiver," I said, my voice cutting through the air like ice. "My father left me a lot of things, Ethan, but the most important thing he gave me was the power to wipe away his mistakes. And you are the biggest mistake I ever made." Ethan signed the papers with trembling hands right there on the curb. I rolled up the window, drove into my garage, and walked back into my home. He had tried to exploit my absence and throw me out like trash, but he forgot that the very ground he was standing on belonged to the family he betrayed. His lives were completely destroyed, and he was left with absolutely nothing.